I would like to welcome you all to this first panel on this day, where we have the opportunity to have an input from 7 distinguished panelists. I will introduce them as we go ahead. But just as a way of start, I think we have heard about the significance of addressing and holding accountable those responsible for crimes against cultural heritage from the previous speakers. We have heard how cultural heritage embodies the history, the identity of a people and a nation, and how its obliteration can have enduring effects on the collective consciousness and the identity both of the individuals in the nation and of the nation itself. Therefore, investigating and prosecuting the perpetrators of these crimes is key for accountability and may serve as a deterrent for others in terms of future possible violations. The documentation and the preservation of evidence related to these crimes is also instrumental for the possible restoration and reconstruction of damaged and destroyed sites. Tackling crimes against cultural heritage is a fundamental aspect of adhering to international humanitarian law. Holding the offenders accountable is key to achieving justice. European Union Advisory Mission, EUIM, in Ukraine is a proud partner of Ukraine in accountability for war crimes committed in the context of the Russian war on Ukraine. EUIM is also a member of the so-called Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group, ACA, which was established by the United States, by the European Union, and by the United Kingdom in May of 2022 to coordinate efforts to achieve accountability for atrocity crimes in the context of Russia's ongoing war. It is therefore my pleasure to moderate the first panel of this conference, which will explore the impact and the scale of damage caused by the full-scale invasion on Russian cultural heritage. We have, as I mentioned, a lineup of distinguished panelists who will address in turn key issues on the topics they will talk about. We have limited time, and in order to allow every one of our panelists to present their experiences and their thoughts, I will pose one question to each panelist for their intervention. And I will ask of our panelists to keep their presentation as short as possible, much more than 5 minutes if possible. And I will avail myself kindly but firmly of my powers as moderator to wrap up interventions if they run much over time. It's important to give the time and space for all our panelists to talk today. So, firstly, I would like to introduce Rostislav Garandiev, who is the acting Minister of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine. Previously, he held senior positions both in the Kiev state administration and in the government, particularly within the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine, including posts such as Deputy Minister, Chief of Staff, and State Secretary of the Ministry, a real expert. And Mr. Minister, since at least the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Ukrainian cultural heritage has been repeatedly under attack. Preservation and protection of movable and immovable goods, heritage, is a priority for the Ukrainian government. What should Ukraine do to combat impunity for the destruction and theft of its cultural heritage in this ongoing conflict and to ensure that such crimes do not go unpunished?
Шановні колеги, українські
Dear colleagues, Ukrainian colleagues, international partners, today we have to be very categorical when expressing judgments. We cannot afford going with gray shadows. Unfortunately, today there is good and bad, there is black and white. And unfortunately, it concerns not only human lives, but various aspects of our lives, including culture. Culture is the basement of Ukrainian resilience. It is important to take care of culture today. We cannot postpone these efforts for tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, because it may be too late. Cultural heritage, both movable and immovable, is the reflection of our history, of thousands of years of our history. It's something which underlies our identity, our spirituality, and our unity. Today, as well as several centuries ago, even several decades ago, we are facing Russian attempts to destroy our identity by way of ruining our culture. This is genocide. This is how Russia is attempting to erase our nation. Because without culture, without nature, there is no country, there is no state, there is just a territory.
War causes damages, and these damages should and must be evaluated and estimated and calculated. From what previous speakers said and the welcoming remarks, we heard the numbers. These numbers are changing every day, unfortunately, and if we speak of over 900 cultural heritage sites which have been destroyed or damaged, it was as of yesterday. Today, there might be more of them. As far as the destroyed and damaged cultural infrastructure objects are concerned, the same number, it's only growing, unfortunately. From what we heard from the Prime Minister and other ones providing welcoming remarks, and our colleague, the Prosecutor General of Romania, gave specific names of the objects that we have lost. A lot of people all over the world know about them. It's Spaso-Preobrazhensky Cathedral in Odessa. It's Skovoroda Museum in Skovorodinivka in Kharkiv region, and other objects. I'll not be listing them right now because all the hundreds, all till the last one, the objects that we lost are worth of mentioning, because all of them are important for our memory and for our preservation. When we look at these numbers, huge numbers of losses, I guess no one has a doubt that this is done deliberately. It seems sometimes that a missile hits something by chance, that it hits a cultural object by chance. Miscalculation of the missile. No, we have to clearly, categorically say Russia deliberately destroys our heritage. It's deliberate ruination of Ukrainian culture. What are those sites that we are losing? It's not just property, it's not just some property titles. We don't even account them as a value in terms of money in our basic accounting funds. We have specific classification for these objects, and that's right. Because we are losing, what we are losing here is not property, we are losing its significance, the mentality that is shaped by these objects. In our opinion, and that's totally correct, as it was stated already today, all these crimes have to be evaluated internationally. They have to be evaluated from the viewpoint of international justice, and not just evaluation and classification. Those who did it must be brought to accountability. It's not easy to make it work, we know that. And there is a reason why the Office of the Prosecutor General, together with the office, shaped this platform where we engage our international partners. Ukraine doesn't have experience of recording cultural losses. We ask our international partners to help us with that, according to proper protocols that then will be perceived in international courts, that will be recognized in international courts, to fix each loss in each criminal proceeding initiated in Ukraine regarding each cultural heritage site. There should be a claim to the aggressor state prepared in accordance with all the relevant international requirements and recommendations. We must not just recommend and document and describe. That's the first step, evidently. But we must also understand that we must protect the objects that we still have, that haven't been ruined yet. It's a challenging task as well, because over each museum, over each heritage site, we cannot put a patriot, we cannot cover it with a dome. We can plan as much as we can what we do to preserve the museum fund, what can be moved, what has been moved, and what is, we believe for today, is stored securely. However, even here, we weren't ready for the challenges that war brought about. It's very relevant to create the National Depository Fund, the national fund that is modern, that is reliable. Unfortunately, we have to speak about it today. However, it's better a little bit later than just avoiding to deal with this issue altogether. We don't know what the history of our relations with Russia in the coming years will be like. We must make sure that museum funds of Ukraine, which are part of global cultural heritage, will be provided with the best possible storage modalities. Here we cannot do it on our own. We need the support and help from international community. It's important to create institutions to preserve cultural identity as much as possible, as much extensively as possible in Ukraine. We don't say that you need to have yet another army of officials. No, that should be very, very skilled and very competent specialists in preserving our cultural heritage. To finalize, I want to briefly remember yet another cultural heritage that cannot be evaluated in terms of material calculations. It's about non-property cultural heritage, about people who are the ones that are the carriers of this elements. Losing people is losing our heritage. Losing people who are those who have this cultural values imbued, it's impossible. It's a same as big challenge, and here we also suffer from illegal acts of the aggressor state, not only by losing the property objects, but also by losing people who today adhere to the ancestors. The Ministry of Culture, Information and Politics thank the Office of the Prosecutor General for arranging this. Thank you for being here. Thank you for arranging it. It's important to speak about it, but moreover to take actions after those words. We were ready and we will be doing this important work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for this important input. And now I would like to introduce Ms. Danielle Bell, who is the head of mission of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine and also representative of the Office of United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Ukraine. You have served also as Chief of Human Rights Office other places in Iraq, and in your career you focus on strengthening human rights protection, fostering access to justice, and ensuring accountability. And the question for you, I think, is the UN Special Rapporteur on cultural rights has warned that the denial of Ukrainian identity and history as a justification for war violates Ukrainians' right to self-determination and their cultural rights, and will have devastating effects in a post-war era. What is your assessment of the human rights implications of Russian policies and practices towards Ukrainian cultural heritage?
Thank you. Excellencies, Minister, esteemed guest, it's an absolute honor to be sitting amongst such a distinguished panel and being here today, and a sincere thanks to the organizers of this incredibly timely event. Our mission is currently finalizing a report on human rights violations in the occupied territory of Ukraine since the full-scale invasion. This report will include parts on violations affecting culture. So today is a perfect opportunity to present some of our findings, which are based on over 2,300 interviews with people who are in occupied territory, who have just returned from occupied territory. So based on our interviews with thousands of Ukrainians, what we've observed and documented is that the cultural policies implemented by the Russian Federation in the newly occupied territory mirror those previously enforced in Crimea since 2014. Today, I would like to provide examples of approaches, measures, and policies taken by the Russian Federation in the newly occupied territory concerning cultural heritage. And I'll focus on three things: suppression of Ukrainian identity, cultural policies targeting children, particularly the education system, and removal of Ukrainian culture. So on the suppression of Ukrainian culture and identity, what we've seen is the occupying authorities, they not only unlawfully imposed Russian structures, but they also systematically sought to suppress Ukrainian culture and identity. Official narratives in Russia have long denied the existence of a distinct Ukrainian culture and identity. For example, in recent years, President Putin's assertions perpetuated this narrative, labeling Ukrainians as part of a unified Russian people and vilifying Ukraine's post-Maidan leadership. Derogatory terms like Nazi have been used to insult those expressing Ukrainian identity or those who have resisted the occupation. The Russian president's statements continued to deliberately undermine Ukrainian identity, portraying Ukrainians as inseparable from Russians and justifying cultural assimilation in occupied territory. Most recently, in December of 2023, the Russian president asserted that Russians and Ukrainians are one people. This position has manifested in policies and actions aimed at the destruction of Ukrainians' cultural and heritage. So, concerning the cultural policies targeting children, children have been particularly targeted under Russian official policy within the education system. For example, through participation in Russian nationalistic commemoration and coerced enrollment in these camps for youth and children. Official policies in the newly occupied territories have included policies aimed at affecting the consciousness and identity of children. In June 2022, the Russian Minister of Education announced at the start of the school year 2022-23 that all schools in occupied territory of Ukraine must adhere to the Russian standards. We spoke with so many Ukrainian teachers who had been pressured, threatened, forced into implementing the Russian curriculum and conducting classes in the Russian language. And so many cases we've documented of teachers being attacked, threatened, intimidated, arrested, simply for questioning these policies or for opposing them. Occupation authorities simultaneously sought to remove access to education aligned with the Ukrainian curriculum by seizing Ukrainian educational materials. Access to the internet platforms that were providing distance education in Ukrainian were blocked throughout the occupied territory. The Russian curriculum does not represent Ukraine as an independent, unique country. For example, one history textbook analyzed by my staff states that a junta came to power in Ukraine in 2014 after a bloody armed rebellion, and that the goal of this special military operation was the protection of the region of Donbass. I mean, these are just some examples of the false narrative that's being promoted in the school system. Finally, the removal of Ukrainian cultural heritage. Russian authorities, as the previous presenters have said, have systematically removed symbols of the Ukrainian cultural heritage, including monuments, literature, music, and national symbols, while promoting Soviet and Russian memorials. Street signs have been changed, Ukrainian cultural artifacts were evacuated, seized, diminishing Ukrainian history and culture. The adoption of certain laws and implementation by the Russian Federation further institutionalized cultural theft, which of course is in violation of international law. In conclusion, these policies and practices reflect deliberate efforts to impose and reinforce a Russian identity while suppressing expressions of a distinct Ukrainian identity, including in language. These policies have removed the right of the population in occupied territory to freely choose their own cultural identity and to access and participate in their chosen cultural life. There must be accountability for these deliberate attacks on Ukraine's heritage, and we must unite in our collective efforts to ensure justice for these crimes. If I may conclude with a quote from the UN Special Rapporteur on cultural rights. The questioning and denial of the Ukrainian identity and history as a justification for war is a violation of Ukrainians' right to self-determination and their cultural rights, and will have devastating effects in the post-war context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dania. And now I would like to call upon Olga Budkevich, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is the president of the Ukrainian Association of International Law, an associate professor of the Institute of International Relations, where she conducts research on the history of international law and public international law. Crimes against cultural heritage have both a domestic and an international dimension that call for diversified approaches. During an armed conflict, the international dimension exposes issues of proper legal framework and qualification of the criminal offenses. Where do we stand in this debate, and to which extent does the Ukrainian system reflect the international law perspective in the protection of cultural heritage?
Thank you very much. Шановні пані і панове, передусім хотіла б
First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Office of the Prosecutor General for arranging today's event.
Large-scale international armed conflict reveals certain gaps in international law, especially international law, and new problems for the world community. Russia's armed aggression against Ukraine since 2014 revealed a whole complex of the following problems: the validity of treaties between the hostile parties, crimes against flora and fauna during an armed conflict, large-scale damage to nature, to environment, ecocide, humanitarian demining of farmland, protection of national and religious minorities in the occupied territories, protection of civilians in the occupied territories, and many others. One of these problems is the protection of cultural heritage, and this problem is two-sided. First, the obligation to refrain from actions that would harm cultural objects during the conduct of military actions. This is required by international humanitarian law. And second, the obligation to protect cultural heritage by the party on the territory of which the conflict is taking place. Crimes against cultural heritage committed by the Russian occupiers in Ukraine have reached such a scale that they are often called cultural genocide. I would say that even more, that the destruction of Ukrainian cultural heritage, starting with the destruction of the sources, archives of Tripilla culture, has been committed since the very period of Russian Empire. However, one should be very careful with terminology. After all, very often, under the impression of the gravity of the crimes which are committed, they are equated with genocide. Especially often in media and in political science, war crimes and especially crimes against humanity are equated with genocide. We should be very careful with this terminology, because in order not to diminish, not to reduce the notion of genocide as the crime of crimes. At the same time, confusion in terminology does not diminish the gravity of crimes committed against cultural heritage, especially, as I have said, for Ukraine. Therefore, it is necessary to single out crimes against cultural heritage as an element of the systematic extermination of the people, at the international and national criminal level, both in normative way and institutionally. When using the term cultural genocide, one often refers to the ideas of Raphael Lemkin. Thus, it was him who introduced the concept of crime of genocide and considered it in a very broad sense. Lemkin considered the main manifestations of genocide to be biological, physical, and cultural. The latter is the destruction of cultural, linguistic, and religious characteristic of group of people. Indeed, Raphael Lemkin quite widely considered the concept of genocide. At the same time, the aspect of cultural genocide was not included in the Convention on the Prevention of the Crime of Genocide and to the Declaration of the Protection of Indigenous People, the UN Declaration. At the same time, both working groups considered this crime of cultural genocide. Both groups worked with this notion, but they did not include it by now. Dear colleagues, now we are living in the time of the law of international community, the law of mankind. One of the factors and manifestations of the formation of this system is the notion of, or the concept of, the common heritage of mankind. The concept of cultural values as the world heritage of humanity was enshrined in a number of international documents. All these documents proceed from the fact that world cultural heritage is the property of humanity. Its protection is a common interest of all international community as a whole, and damage caused to such objects is considered not as a damage caused to a victim of aggression or of this crime, but a damage caused to the whole world community. Thus, the concept of world cultural heritage is another brick in the development of the international legal concept of humanity, the law of the world community. The same can be said about the cultural foundations of each ethnic group, which are the heritage of humanity and its diversity. A crime against such foundation must be seen in the context of crime against all humankind and in the context of the concept of erga omnes rules, which consider that each grave violation of international law is not just a violation against a victim, it's a violation against whole humanity, and whole humanity, whole international community should solve this problem. Now, from the point of view of international law, it is appropriate to return to Raphael Lemkin's idea of ethnocide as a component of genocide. According to him, genocide does not necessarily mean the immediate destruction of a nation. It is indeed rather to signify a coordinate plan of different actions among aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. The objectives of such plan would be disintegration of the political and social institutions, of culture, language, national feelings, religion, etc. All these Ukrainians do know very well. Relevant innovations will also be needed relevant innovations are also needed to international humanitarian law in order to strengthen the protection of cultural heritage during armed conflicts. In particular, neither the Geneva Conventions of 1949 and their protocols, nor the Hague Convention of the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict and protocols to this convention contain direct norms regarding the protection of intangible cultural heritage. The Russian-Ukrainian conflict, in which thousands of cultural monuments and values have already been destroyed and even more have been damaged, the cultural heritage of Ukraine is being looted by the aggressor state, has shown that international law urgently needs to single out the concept of crimes against cultural heritage and to strengthen responsibility for them as one of the most serious crimes against the world community. From the point of view of national criminal law, the issue of preparing for an armed conflict, it is important, and that also revealed Russian-Ukrainian conflict. The Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict and additional protocol to it stipulated that the high contracting parties undertake to prepare in time of peace for the safeguarding of cultural property within their own territory against the foreseeable effects of an armed conflict. As we have seen, not everything was done by Ukraine. Ukraine was not ready to fulfill its obligations under this convention, and that also should be investigated in national criminal level. To sum up, I would like to say that crimes against cultural property, Russian-Ukrainian conflict and war in Ukraine reveals that crimes against cultural property, cultural values, against the most significant and essential elements of ethnic group. Such crimes are among the most dangerous for the world community. They should be singled out. They should be regarded as a separate concept, concept of international crimes, starting with all elements of such a concept, starting from the notion, elements and essence of these crimes, and ending with responsibility and accountability for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these in-depth analysis about the situation on cultural heritage. And now I would like to introduce Mr. Anton Dobrovich, who is the head of the Ukrainian Institute for National Memory. You have worked in state institutions of culture and education. You've been advisor to the Minister of Education and Science of Ukraine. And you've also been the head of the Planning and Development Strategy Service of the Mystetsky Arsenal National Art and Culture Museum Complex. Research is increasingly highlighting the essential role of cultural heritage and the memories it encompasses in shaping the collective identities of individuals, groups, and communities. What has been the impact of the full-scale invasion with regard to this process in Ukraine? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I will try to answer on your question in my presentation. Oh, thank you. I have a little presentation. I have prepared a long speech in English, but due to difficult timing, I will limit myself and use my short presentation in Ukrainian. Перш за все, слід сказати, що ця війна триває вже 10 років. Ми про це багато говоримо.
It needs to be mentioned in the first place that the war is in place for 10 years already. The full-scale war is in place for 2 years, and the number of crimes committed by Russians in the Ukrainian territory went up dramatically. On this slide, you can see a non-exhaustive list of international documents violated by the Russian Federation. I have a full version of this document which lists all international instruments violated by Ukraine with detailed descriptions by articles and paragraphs. If somebody wants evidence of what Russian committed in Ukraine, I can share my experience with you. I spent 2 weeks looking into what exactly Russians did in the territory of Ukraine in terms of attack on cultural heritage. And while doing that job, I was inspired and backed up by international documents, including UN General Assembly resolution. And I found, so it has been confirmed at the highest level. So I can share the document I developed with you. I will try now to talk in more details about the job I've done and about what the impact of such crimes is. I'm very grateful to the previous speakers, Olga Butkevich and Daniel Bell, for outlining some key aspects related to attacks on cultural heritage. But before that, a few words about Russia. Russia has been preparing for this war, for the full-scale stage of the war, during many years. They've done it in particular by distorting the national memory of its own people. So you can see some evidence on this slide. Here you have an article about the ban of national memorial in Russia. This is evidence of systemic manipulation of a historic fact in Russia. So in a nutshell, Russian government has been dismantling the basics of Russian national memory for many, many years. In this slide, you can see an article about judgments against Russian thinkers who try to fight against propaganda. Now you can see fake stories invented by Russian propaganda and published on the official websites of Russian ministries, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. You can see the link leading to some publications about the U.S. Intervention in Nicaragua. And here you see the pinnacle of the propaganda, Putin's speech, in which he tried to provide grounds and explanations of the full-scale invasion. And on the left, you could see the notorious article drafted by Putin about his personal view of Ukrainian and history. Here you see the recent interview to Tucker Carlson by Putin, where they were talking about war. I would say about war which continues, because there is no sign that the war that there is an intention to bring this war to an end. I'll now share with you some of key messages of Russian propaganda. So Ukraine was created by Russia. Then Russia would give Ukraine lands for nothing, as a gift. Then Ukraine believed in their national idea, in their national identity. They became Nazis, and then Ukraine decided to attack Russia. All these according to Putin. So you can imagine a 40 million nation decided to attack 140 million nation. Then, so these are all just ideas shared by President Putin in his interview to Tucker Carlson. So all in all, Russia had to attack Ukraine, because otherwise it would have been attacked by Ukraine. So this message cannot be seriously criticized or taken seriously and criticized. It is in contradiction with various international documents. It is in contradiction with documents issued under the Soviet Union by the Soviet Union government. It is in contradiction with reality. So one can hardly seriously comment on this. According to official estimations, as of today, some 10,000 Ukrainian civilians died as a result of Russian aggression. In the meantime, the actual number of victims may differ and is probably much higher. Alongside these attacks against Ukrainian people, there are attacks on cultural heritage. And according to recent research, crimes against culture and against cultural heritage are pattern crimes. So these are crimes which are committed deliberately and intentionally. For instance, there are crimes against education. meaning that Russians forbid Ukrainian education in the occupied territories. So they change names of streets. For instance, the city of Mariupol is almost fully destroyed, and they start with replacing plates with names of the streets in the city. They burn books. You have probably seen the UNESCO report on attacks against cultural heritage. There is no clear statement about whether specific attacks are targeted or not, but the fact is that a lot of cultural objects have been under attack and are still under attack. I think it is very positive and useful to have Alina Datsenko as a speaker here. She is the director of Kherson Regional Art Museum, and she will speak about a particular case, about very specific things. She will talk about how Russians took away from so they took away the whole museum collection, museum fund from the Kherson Art Museum when leaving the town. So they fight against Ukrainian culture, against Ukrainian music and other cultural aspects. So I will stick with what Olga Butkevich said today. There is a clear pattern of behavior of Russians in the occupied territory. They are trying to get rid of everything which is Ukrainian. They are trying to erase any sign of Ukrainian culture in people who remain in the occupied territories. And should they face any disagreement, they just kick people away from the territories. Here you see the text of the Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and you may see that there are very clear signs of genocide which are targeting particular groups, preventing such a group from normal living conditions, moving away children, etc. There are several options in the framework of genocide: total annihilation, extermination, and the example is Holocaust. So Holocaust was intended to exterminate a certain group as such. There is another type of genocide, which is assimilation and appropriation, and that is what we witness in Ukraine. Sorry for taking more of your time, and thank you for your attention.
Polya, who is the frontman of the Ukrainian band Antitila. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He supported the revolution of dignity from the very beginning, and you dedicated your song Independent to the events on Maidan Square back then. Protecting cultural heritage goes beyond political and legal matters and expands to tools that are cultural themselves. How can music and art contribute to the cause of protecting cultural heritage?
Hi to everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion. As I see, we're running out of time, so I will reduce my speech and let me to speak my native language, Ukrainian, to be more clear and understandable. So,
today a lot has been said on non-material objects. They're counted, they're listed. I'll not add anything more. A lot has been said already. I want to speak about non-property objects, not property objects of cultural heritage that can be spoken a lot. I'll try to speak briefly. If your enemy is trying to squish out the culture is one of the elements of your self-identification, spending a lot of efforts lasting couple of 100 years. It means it's important as well as economy, language, and territory of your country. Russia has always intended to destroy Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture. History from the past. 1934, the Congress of the singers special singers of Ukraine called Kobzari, and so-called setting out and use Soviet priorities. Respective resolutions, after the respective resolutions, such singers, under the pretext of having some specific congress, they were taken to Kazacha Lopan in Kharkiv region. Very late, they were taken in the forest where there were special trenches. They put the blind singers and their assistants, and they killed them all, and then they burned their musical instruments. They killed from 100 to 120 such special Kobzar singers. Why these Kobzar singers? Because they were the long-standing carriers of such culture they were the carriers of the Ukrainian DNA. Speaking in modern terms, those Kobzar singers were the influencers of the then days. Near Kazacha Lopan, where such Kobzar singers were killed, our battalion went there. A lot of our men, a lot of children without a father. Only in my battalion, from the very first day of the full-scale invasion, we had 5 singers. Serhiy Vasylyuk, Vitaly Kirichenko, and me, together with musicians, together with Serhiy Usyk and Dmitro Zholot. Thankfully, we were able to survive under many artillery shells, and we were able to do what we were requested to do. We worked as the paramedics, unlike the golden voice of Ukraine, Vasyl Silipak, who died from the sniper bullet in fight for Ukraine. Unlike many other known and unknown creative persons in Ukraine who will never create music, who never write something in Ukrainian because they have already been killed by Russia. Russians are destroying culture. They conduct genocide not only by physically destroying the carriers of Ukrainian culture, but mental reprogramming to follow the Ruski Mir, Russian world. It's what they use in their information propaganda massively. Why is culture important? Because it's the backbone of a cultural framework that holds together and that unites around joint principles of coexistence. It's thanks to the culture that we see tribes connecting into peoples and peoples into nations. We are now going from being a people to being a nation, and our young political issues and democracy have indeed some gaps, but what we don't have gaps in is our culture that traces back to Tripilya, Kiev, and Rus, and the world of today. That is why the enemy is trying to destroy our culture, and it's impossible to be a nation without culture. And our task is to preserve this culture, to develop it, and to give it further to the next generations. And Titila are doing it together by counteracting the Russian content, so much of it is generated. The enemy has oil and gas, and that finances not only war but also cultural expansion into the ears of everyone who is able to understand the word or the language of the enemy. We understand the capabilities and potential of music and preserving non-material heritage of Ukraine. While we are alive, we'll continue. Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes.
Attention to the time element also. Now I would like to introduce Tamila Tasheva, who is the permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Following the Russian annexation of Crimea, she worked to gather facts about the disappearance, the abuse and violations committed in Crimea. The cultural heritage of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea has been deeply affected by the illegal annexation. What are the special features of the cases of destruction and looting which have occurred in the peninsula, and how should they be addressed both domestically and internationally?
Thank you, Your Excellency. Доброго здоров'я всім.
Hello everyone. I'd like to come back to what the General Prosecutor of Lithuania said, that it seems that I will start my speech in a little bit unusual way, and I was so much impressed that she decided to speak in her native Lithuanian language. I so much want to speak in my native language, in Crimean and Tatarian language. Unfortunately, over 100 years, Russian Empire, then Soviet Union, and then Russian Federation has been protecting and annihilating my native language by destroying our best intelligence, our best people, and by suppressing us, and by taking away from the Crimea the respective native population. And Androbovich spoke a lot about the propaganda that was done in Ukraine and in the Russian Federation. But I'd also like to make the remark that propaganda was also done in the Western European countries, including the global South continent, like Southeast Asia, Latin America, South Africa, and Russia has been preparing a long time for this crime. When I meet our international partners as representatives of the civil sector, different analytical centers, and politicians, from time to time I hear a phrase that, it's not so cut and clear and cut with Crimea. I hear that Crimea has always been Russian. What I want to say, Crimea has never been Russian. Crimean was and is Ukrainian and Crimean Tatarian. Crimea is a very good example of the destruction and colonization. In 1773, almost at the same time when the very start of Ukrainian statehood and the Crimean state was also destroyed, we see that there were changes in the names of streets and cities, and I'm happy that although after many years after such a start and breakout of such annexation, we are now going to renaming imperial names, including in the territory of the Crimean Peninsula. Now we see that such resolution of the government is being drafted. Coming back to questions that distinguished ambassador asked us, the war broke out 10 years ago. The war against Crimean and Ukrainian identity in the Crimean Peninsula. The fact that the cultural heritage was being destroyed from the very first day is evidenced by a lot of facts happening in the occupied territories. First and foremost, it happened 10 years ago in Crimea. I want to name just a couple of figures. In Crimea, there were 1.2 million of objects of the museums in 26 museums in 5 specific cultural heritage sites. Over 3,000 sites of different aspects of different periods of civilization. What Russia did from the very beginning, it introduced Russian legislation regarding the cultural and archaeological heritage. Over 150,000 cultural objects, including 8,000 property objects, are registered according to Russian legislation, and it shows that Russia is trying to appropriate these artifacts. As of 2014, Russian administration has been systematically taking out our cultural objects and our artifacts, has been looting our museums and bringing the objects to the territory of the Russian Federation. What it started doing after 2022, after the full-scale invasion, I guess Ms. Alina will tell it in detail. The same we saw when first the objects were taken in the territory of Crimea and then into the territory of Russia from the territory of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. Of course, I cannot but mention ruthless militarization of the peninsula and how this militarization reflected on our cultural objects. I should say that fortification constructions on such issues like Orkapu fortress is a threat to the structural integrity of these sites, and we should say that building a not a civil object but such military objects like Tavrida highway, when we lost just so many archaeological plasts on the territory of the peninsula, and we saw that there were black looting and bringing these objects into the territory of the Russian Federation. Of course, we need to remember the Han Palace in Bakhchisarai, which is the biggest site and cultural heritage of the Crimean Peninsula that was considered, I hope, is still being considered to be included into the cultural heritage for now in a tentative list, and so-called restoration is taking place. What is taking place there is that this cultural object is being rebuilt. Illegal construction in the territory of cultural objects such Khersones Tavrisky, changing their first and foremost nature. The object is being shaped into the Russian Orthodox source, and we see that some objects are already taken into the territory of Ukraine from Khersones Tavrisky. The occupation administration has ordered evacuation of museums in Crimea, and the fate of the collections moved from the museums are very much unknown to us. The next thing that is worth mentioning here is that we see that the artworks are being sold, and we should mention the last selling of Ayvazovsky's painting about a month ago. Of course, it violates international legislation, including the UNESCO Convention of 1970 that prohibits such transfer of cultural valuables. And now we'll see discussions. I'm very thankful for the organizers for the fact that we have discussions about illegal theft and selling of such objects, how we can foresee it, how we can prevent it. I hope that it will be a very expert level discussion. So what we're seeing in the last 10 years is that these scales remind us the Second World War, how the artifacts were taken from the countries under the active military hostilities during the Second World War. I want to thank so much the NGOs that systematically, as of 2014, have been monitoring the situation in the area of cultural heritage. I'll not list the names. Everyone knows them, and we'll hear from them in one of the last panel discussions. Thank you so much for providing this information to the ICC. Thank you for the fact that there are criminal proceedings for the facts of such violations in the Republic, in the Prosecutor's Office of the Crimea and of the city of Sevastopol. And as far as important steps to be taken are concerned, we are now working on a strategy of cognitive deoccupation. I'm very much grateful to the colleagues who have joined this process, because to take out the minds from the minds of the people also includes bringing back cultural artifacts in the deoccupied territories. Of course, it includes the work with identity and bringing back Ukrainian national identity in the territory, the deoccupied territory of Ukraine. It's a lot of work. It's thorough work that requires the involvement of different stakeholders, state and not state, international partners as well. That is why even before the liberation of all of our territories, but we know that, of course, we know that our victory is coming back to the borders of 1991, and to join efforts right now is important. Thank you so much for your invitation. I'm grateful to all the panelists for such important interventions, and I'm sure that we will be able to exert our joint efforts in order to ensure the victory. Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes.
I would like to introduce Alina Dotsenko, who has worked for the Kherson Art Museum, as I gather, 45 years, with 35 years as its director. The Art Museum in Kherson has been at the heart of Kherson's cultural life for over 46 years. We know there were plans to transform the museum into a modern art space while preserving its unique character. However, those plans were disrupted by the Russian full-scale aggression. What was the scale of the damage and looting suffered by the museum, and how is the museum currently engaged in retrieving those stolen goods and promoting awareness both domestically and internationally?
I'm very grateful for this possibility to address the international community and to tell about what happened to the Kherson Regional Art Museum. I've been the director of the museum for more than 35 years. So the museum hosted collections which have been brought to the museum, which had been shaped for many years. There were pieces by various Ukrainian artists: Олексій Шовкуненко, Микола Пимоненко, Давид Бурлюк, Іван Айвазовський, Тетяна Яблонська, Ivan Kramsky, and other classical Ukrainian artists, which was hosted by the building which constituted an architectural property in the south of Ukraine. It happened 46 years ago. We had a very ambitious plan to transform the museum into a modern artistic space, and while in the meantime preserving its unique character. So in 2021, the major restoration was launched, but it was interrupted by the Russian aggression. On the 25th of February, I, as the director of the museum, ordered teleworking for all the museum employees, except for the several most trusted employees who stayed with me in the museum. We were literally hiding behind the construction fence. The trusted people told to the occupiers that all the museum collections were removed because of the restoration. So we stayed in the museum, and we managed to preserve the existing state of play until July 2022. Then on the 19th of July, the collaborants would disclose the truth to the occupiers, and they would come to the museum. When the armed forces of Ukraine started liberating territories and approached the city of Kherson, Russians would take away the museum funds to Russia in the same manner as it was done by the German occupiers in 1944, when the most valuable part of the collection was taken away to Germany and Romania. I never ever in my life could I imagine that such a thing would happen in the 21st century. So it would take them 5 days from October 30 until November 4, 2022 to load the pieces of art and take them away from the museum. They were using trucks and school buses. Out of 14,000 museum items which were part of the museum collection, we managed to preserve only 3,000. So the best pieces of Ukrainian cultural heritage and masterpieces from France, England, Germany, Italy, and the US ended up captivated by Russian thieves. Since then, we've been trying to trace the items. We managed to identify 88 masterpieces, which ended up in a so-called Central Museum of Tavrida. Some part of the collection was taken to Crimea. Russian war against Ukraine is a war of the humanity, against humanity and world heritage. The evidence is the fact that cultural objects and cultural property is being damaged and ruined. Our museum, which is a pearl of, which is located in a building, which is a pearl of Ukrainian architecture, has been under massive shoveling on several occasions. We are trying to raise awareness about what happened. We are trying to work as closely and effectively with law enforcement authorities as possible. It will take long for me to list the number of interviews which I gave to various media, both national and international, including from the US, from Japan, and from other countries. We managed to preserve the electronic copies of the whole museum collection. So we have these storage devices where the digital copies are stored. We need to make them public as soon as possible. We need to put joint efforts. We need diplomats, law enforcement officers, artists, politicians, art dealers to act together in order to prevent spreading out and trafficking in the collection of the museum, Kherson Regional Museum of Art. We believe that we will manage to return the museum collection in the meantime, we will be happy to accept other masterpieces as donations in order to start restoring our collection now, here and now. Our strong belief is based on the fact that Ukraine is right in this war. Ukraine is supported by the international community, by a lot of countries. We will continue doing our job. This is our contribution to the common victory. We are looking forward to receiving you in the renovated Museum of Art named after Alexei Shavkunenko. Thank you very much for your attention.
Song, which is quite unspeakable. I want to thank our 7 panelists. We've had, I think, a rich presentation of both concrete evidence from concrete cases of attacks on the cultural heritage of Ukraine. We've also had some concrete perspectives as to the importance, the cultural importance for the identity of Ukraine and for Ukraine as a nation. And I think we've underlined with these interventions how important cultural heritage is for a nation and how devastating such type of attacks that we have heard about today can be on a nation and its people. And this, I think, is a good basis for deliberating further in the panels to come on about how to build accountability for these crimes, both in the domestic scene, but certainly also on the international scene. So I would, unfortunately, we've run out of time. It would have been great to have some Q&A time, but such is life not today. But I think we've had really, really good input from our panelists, and ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving them a big hand.